I'm very happy for them to play computer games, but I find it very hard to remove them, and at the end of it, we saw Richard, he's overexcited, very, very hard to handle. There's something about that flickering screen that just seems to make him very angry. And Edward. Rachel not so much, but it does seem to leave them very angry. So they lose games with cards, they lose games with Monopoly, they get angry, but it doesn't seem to last for as long.
When you're doing something really exciting that the child wants to do and you take it away from them, it's not uncommon for them to have a negative reaction to it. I personally wouldn't be worried with that kind of thing. You know, if a child is literally screaming for half an hour or an hour because they can't play their favourite video game, that might be some indicator that that computer game has become very important in that child's life. I think the good news is that all the evidence suggests is that very, very few children really do get to that state where they become totally obsessed with computer games.
Part of the problem is that if you look at the advice literature for parents right now, it by and large advises people to just say no. It by and large says it rewards parents for just setting limits. Well, you can play an hour but not 2 hours, or you can't play until you have to do your homework. You can't play in your bedroom, you got to play in the living room. It doesn't provide any guidance about how to have an engaging, creative relationship with media and with your kids. It doesn't teach you to have a constructive way of using media in your children's life. And that's what parents need and what I think needs to be brought forth. We need media literacy education for adults as much as for kids.
The ability to interpret and analyse the media influences around us, media literacy, is gaining attention. The thinking is that if you understand the effects of multimedia in popular culture, you're more likely to be able to protect yourself against any negative influences. This seems to have special relevance when viewing the violent virtual images contained in some games.
Games I'm good at are always better, and yeah, violent games, bit of fun. Well, naturally, when you're blowing people up with a large rocket launcher, it doesn't relate to my real world. So, well, if you're really angry with someone and you don't want to go and hit them, you hit someone on a computer screen. No one gets hurt.
If you look at the empirical evidence on the work that's been done examining the effect of violent video games on children, what you tend to find is that the younger the child is, the more likely there is to be an effect. So for instance, we know from 4 or 5 studies all done in the US that children below the age of 8 years of age, if they play or watch a violent video game, they do in the short term reenact and mimic what they've seen on the screen. Now the problem with that, of course, it's just a short-term effect. It may actually be a function of the way that those particular experiments are carried out. The other problem we have is that there's been no longitudinal research at all following a cohort of children over a long period of time, looking at how much video games they play and their subsequent aggressive behaviour. And we can't control for what we call confounding variables, other things like, you know, the amount of violent films they watch, the amount of violence they see on television, either through entertainment or on the news, or even violence they see in the playground, and you can't really control for that.
The games industry is regulated and there are age guidelines on products, but is there still cause for concern? Jim G thinks not.
The violence issue is overblown, and I think it's one that is beloved by politicians because it gets a lot of attention. First of all, the best-selling computer game by far is a series of The Sims, which has no violence in it at all. Many, many games are not violent. Second of all, I don't know any rational person that doesn't advocate having controls on games in ways that young people shouldn't be playing adult games, as we do with movies and books and other things. Violence is carried by the culture. It's all about context. So a violent book or a violent video game in the hands of a person who's a disturbed child or in a disturbed culture is a dangerous thing. And we ought to worry about the disturbed culture and the disturbed child.
The language of video games is almost second nature to most British children now. Perhaps it's not surprising then that the next step of designing and building their own games also appeals.
I think it would be good for children to actually make their own games because they're children, so they mostly know what children like. So, because I think sometimes adults, because when they were children, they usually didn't have computer games much, and so they don't know what children really like to do on computer games a lot.
most of these adventure games, they're very original, but there's nothing more original than the imagination of a small person. If I did have a way of making my own game, I definitely would, because young people today are creative and they could make a really good game, I think.
A team from the Institute of Education agreed. In collaboration with an Oxford-based education software company, they set about devising the Making Games project, which would allow children the chance to author their own game software. In effect, to design and build their own game.
So now you've had time playing with this, how far does it answer some of the things the children wanted in the first iteration?
Well, one of the things that they wanted was more kinds of interactivity.
What we're looking at is how games are made and the elements of games, so children are critical of them, they analyse them, they're aware of the games they're playing. We want to give them experiences that are familiar to them, that they recognise, that the production values are the same as they are in games. A lot of software that children see in schools is very two-dimensional. It's click and play and finish. It's not open-ended. What we're trying to do is provide an open-ended experience that's like the game world, but not a game.
Young game makers start by finding their way around one of 4 virtual environments. The rest is up to them. The environments are a kind of puzzle maze within which they will ask players to compete against the clock, identify and find objects to help them, build characters and overcome obstacles to achieve the end of the game. It's quite a challenge for children who have until now been only game players, not game builders.
Because you build something with it that you then present to another person, and you're building an experience for that other person, you have to think very differently about game making from most other things that you encounter in life. You have to describe precisely how to do things. You have to leave clues everywhere, otherwise your game player will get frustrated. And so the thought processes that you have to employ to develop and create a game are quite unique in actual fact, and can be used, I believe, in a lot of other areas of life.
There are 2 types of object, if you think about this. There are more than 2 types, but just try and divide objects up into 2. What would you think they might be? Exactly. There will be objects which just get in your way. So, I mean, if you want to stop someone getting through a door, you could just put a big chest in the way, okay, which is a kind of challenge.
After a year of work on the Making Games project, the software can be demonstrated in the classroom, and its potential is beginning to emerge.
Making games fits within a media education model, really. And in media education, we would want children to understand media texts critically, to learn how they're made, what institutions lie behind them, and how they're produced in a modern economy. We'd want them to enjoy them and explore the nature of that enjoyment, just as you might explore the nature of pleasure in reading or watching films, and understand it a bit better. And we'd want them to be able to make them for themselves as perhaps the best way of understanding the structures that lie behind them, but also the creative pleasure that can be obtained from them.
But what do the young game makers think of it all? Pupils from Parkside Community College in Cambridge and Charles Edward Brooks School in South London are taking part in the project.
Because there's a problem with it when they put on the key, it's meant to open this door, but it's not opening, that's the thing. I didn't really understand how much work really goes into making a game until I started doing this. And I realised how difficult it must be and how many years it takes for the software to develop to a certain state of progress.
You could use this software in geography and the different environments and different rooms could be for different countries and different continents with different cultures. It would make geography a lot more interesting than looking at a textbook.
When you click on the safe, I set a rule so that when it's clicked on, it'll open. And then I liked it because you get to choose what sort of game you make, and often you can get bored with games quite easily. But with this game, because you can make it different every time, you get a chance to make it how you want it and how you want to play it and stuff. And they've got a lot of interesting ways to do different things in it, like all the different objects that move and stuff, and just the way you can interact with it. And it's really technical and stuff, and it's quite easy to use once you know it.
It's worthy of study and important that children grow up aware of how it works, of the codes and the conventions that are involved. And I think it's important that children don't just sort of stand back and analyse these things, but actually have opportunities to engage in finding out what it's like to design or even to create games.
So, just as film, TV and literature are given critical analysis within schools, this 3-year project is a step towards understanding games in the same way as a legitimate cultural form. But technology is also taking us out of the classroom. Makers of mobile phones are keen to offer commercial product like games as downloads, but educationalists are just as keen to use mobile technology as a learning tool. The M-Learning or Mobile Learning project is being trialled across Europe. It uses games to draw in young people who, for various reasons, have taken no interest in formal learning or dropped out of school. The idea is to offer help with literacy and numeracy, and even foreign language learning. Trials so far have been deemed successful. So what are the implications of game technology and the new world of mobile learning for teachers?
I don't think classrooms are going away. I don't think blackboards are going away. I don't think teachers are losing their jobs. I think how we teach may change. I think that these tools allow good teachers to be even better teachers. I think they create new resources that good schools can use to open up opportunities for their students. We're not talking about displacing teachers with just education in the box. We're saying teachers have a vital role to play, that the learning culture around games is as important as the game itself, that the game is the catalyst which enables and motivates all of these other educational activities to take place.
But in the rush to understand the new gaming culture, we shouldn't forget the part that literacy plays in interpreting the world of multimedia. In the largest ever international study of reading, researchers found that the single most important predictor of academic success in the 37 countries studied was the amount of time pupils spent reading. So how do game supporters square that?
People think that video games are giving rise to the death of reading, and it's not true. It is changing the economy of reading. Kids sit by themselves all alone reading books cover to cover less, but they read and write more than they ever have. They read on chat rooms, they read in the games, they write about the games in the chat rooms and the forums, they read books about their interests, like in the mythology, if they're playing Age of Mythology. So reading and writing aren't dying, and as I pointed out earlier, the level of language in Age of Mythology or in Pokemon or in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is far higher than the type of language the kid is seeing at school. So this is not killing reading and writing.
But however it's delivered, new technology will have a vital effect on children's experience. Games are here to stay, along with mobile learning and a host of other technological delights. They may be a nightmare for some and a dream for others, but to serve Britain's children well, those involved in education, it seems, will need to get to grips with whatever the digital future holds in store.